The evening light was fading through the windows of a small-town cafe. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixed with the quiet sound of clinking cups and soft conversations. Behind the counter, a young woman moved quietly, cleaning tables and smiling politely to customers. She wasn't the kind of person anyone paid much attention to. She blended into the background like the gentle hum of a ceiling fan, always there but rarely noticed. Every day after her shift, she would stop near the old piano that sat in the corner. The cafe owner had kept it there for years, though it was mostly for decoration now. Some of the keys didn't even work and the once shiny surface had faded to dull brown, but to her it was more than just an old instrument. It was a memory, a piece of her mother that still breathed quietly in wood and strings. When she was little, her mother used to play for her every night before bed, soft tunes that spoke without words. Back then, life was simple. But after her mother passed, everything changed. She had to grow up quickly, find work, and take care of herself. Music became something she carried silently inside her, like a language she no longer spoke out loud. That cafe became her world, a small space filled with strangers, laughter, and sometimes the cruel sound of people making fun of what they didn't understand. One afternoon, a group of students from the nearby music academy came in. They were loud, full of energy, and clearly proud of who they were. They laughed and teased one another, talking about their concerts and competitions. When one of them noticed the old piano, he joked, "Hey, maybe someone here can make this antique sound again." Another pointed toward the young woman wiping tables nearby. "Maybe she can play for us," he said, his tone playful but mocking. The others laughed. She looked up, surprised, then quickly looked away. Her hands froze around the cloth she was holding. She smiled softly, trying to laugh it off. "Oh no, I just clean here," she said in a quiet voice. But one of them insisted, "Come on, you must know something." "You're always humming when you work." The laughter grew louder. Even the cafe owner heard it from behind the counter and frowned slightly. He knew her well enough to see the hint of pain in her eyes. She didn't argue or defend herself. She simply smiled again and returned to her work. Later that day, when the rush was over, the cafe grew calm again. The students were still sitting in the corner, sipping their coffee and joking among themselves. The cafe owner walked over to her and said softly, "You know, you don't have to let them get to you. If you ever want to play that piano, just do it for yourself. Don't worry about who's watching." She looked at the old piano again. Her hands twitched slightly, remembering the way her mother's fingers used to move, graceful and sure. "It's been a long time," she said quietly. He smiled. "Music doesn't leave you. It waits." His words lingered in her mind. She finished cleaning the last table, but her heart was no longer steady. It was beating faster now, like something deep inside was waking up. She looked again at the students laughing across the room. A mix of fear and curiosity filled her chest. Part of her wanted to prove something. Another part wanted to run away. But before she could decide, one of the students stood up and called out loudly, "Hey, we're still waiting for your performance." The others laughed again. It was meant as a joke, but something in her heart said, "Maybe it's time." The cafe owner gave her a gentle nod. "Go on," he whispered. "Play." Her steps were slow as she walked toward the piano. The room began to quiet down. The students exchanged amused looks, expecting something funny, something to mock. But when she sat down, they noticed her posture changed slightly. Her hands rested on the dusty keys, trembling at first. She pressed one note. It cracked. Another one followed, slightly off tune. A few people chuckled quietly. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The sound of the world seemed to fade. And then, something shifted inside her. Her fingers started to move again. This time not out of fear, but out of memory. The melody was soft, uncertain at first, but it began to grow. Each note carried a story, a voice that had been silent for too long. The rhythm slowly wrapped around the room like a warm breeze. The laughter stopped. Her body leaned slightly forward as the music deepened. It was a tune her mother once played, something filled with sadness and beauty all at once. The students who had mocked her began to exchange quiet looks. The sound coming from that old piano wasn't just music. It was emotion turned into sound. Every note seemed to touch something in the air, something that words couldn't reach. Her eyes stayed closed, her expression calm, almost peaceful. The cafe, once filled with noise, now stood still. Even the people walking past the window slowed down to listen. The students felt something unfamiliar. Respect, maybe even guilt. The same girl they laughed at was now showing them what true music felt like. There were no fancy techniques, no dramatic movements, just honest, pure sound. The melody rose higher, then softened like a whisper. Her hands moved faster, but her face stayed serene. Each chord carried a feeling of longing, love, and memory. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. So real that it felt like the piano itself had come alive again. When she finally stopped, her hands lingered on the keys. For a few seconds, no one moved. The sound of the final note hung in the air like a breath that refused to fade. Then came silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that feels empty. It was the kind that holds meaning. The kind that only happens after something beautiful. She slowly looked up. Some of the students were staring at her, their expressions completely changed. One of them blinked quickly, trying to hide the tears in his eyes. No one laughed this time. No one said a word. She stood up quietly, unsure of what to do. Her heart was still racing, but for the first time in years she felt light, as if a heavy door inside her had finally opened. The cafe owner smiled proudly from behind the counter, his eyes warm. One of the students spoke finally, his voice softer than before. "That was incredible," she gave a small smile. "It's just something my mother used to play," she said. They didn't know what to say after that. The girl they had mocked had given them something they didn't expect, a piece of herself. And though she returned to wiping tables soon after, something in that room had changed. The laughter that once sounded sharp now carried a hint of respect. That night, after everyone had left, she stayed a little longer. The cafe was quiet again. She sat back down at the piano and touched the keys gently. The same melody returned, this time softer, just for her. It wasn't about impressing anyone now. It was just her and the music, like it used to be when her mother was still there. The cafe lights dimmed and the sound of the piano filled the empty space. Outside, the streetlights flickered. The wind carried the soft tune into the night. No one was watching now, but somehow that didn't matter. She finally understood that music didn't need an audience. It just needed a heart willing to feel. And in that quiet cafe, a girl who everyone once overlooked found her voice again, through the same keys that had once belonged to her mother, through the same melody that refused to be forgotten. The next morning, the cafe buzzed with quiet energy. The memory of last night still lingered in the air like perfume that refused to fade. The cafe owner had replayed the sound of her music in his mind again and again. It was the kind of melody that stayed with you, even when everything else grew silent. When she arrived for her shift, things felt different. Usually no one noticed when she walked in, but today every eye turned her way. The same students who once laughed now greeted her softly, their tone full of awkward respect. A few even said good morning, though their voices carried a hint of guilt. She smiled shyly, unsure how to react. The cafe owner gave her a knowing smile. "You did something special yesterday," he said quietly as she tied her apron. "You reminded people what real music feels like." She looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I just wanted to play," he chuckled. That's exactly why it mattered. For the rest of the morning, she worked as usual, but everything around her felt new. People whispered softly about her performance. A few customers asked the owner if she was a professional pianist. Others wanted to know when she would play again. Each question made her heart race faster. She wasn't used to attention. She was used to being invisible. Later that afternoon, the group of students returned. This time they weren't laughing. They ordered quietly, glancing at her from time to time. One of them finally approached her as she wiped the counter. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "About yesterday. We didn't mean to mock you. We were just joking around. But that music," and he paused, searching for words. "It really hit us. You're amazing," she smiled softly. "It's all right. I used to get nervous even touching a piano. I didn't expect anyone to listen." Another student added, "You should perform at the town music event next week. It's open to everyone." "You'd fit right in." She froze. "Me? No, I don't think I could do that." They looked at each other. "You should think about it," one said kindly. "People need to hear what you can do." After they left, she leaned against the counter, lost in thought. The idea of playing in front of a crowd terrified her. The cafe was one thing. She had been hidden among familiar walls, but a real event with strangers and judges and lights, that was another world. Still, a tiny spark of curiosity flickered inside her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe her mother's dream for her hadn't died after all. That evening, as she finished her shift, the cafe owner brought her a cup of tea. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he said. She nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can do it." He leaned on the counter, his eyes kind. "The only thing that stops most people isn't a lack of talent. It's fear. You've already faced the hardest part. You played your heart out in front of people who doubted you. The rest is just music." His words settled in her heart. She thought about the way the piano felt under her fingers, the warmth of the notes, the way silence turned to awe when she played. That feeling had been real. It made her feel alive again. That night she walked home slowly under the streetlights. The road was quiet except for the soft sound of her shoes against the pavement. When she reached her small apartment, she stood by the window for a while, thinking about the past, the days when her mother would sit beside her, guiding her hands gently across the keys. "You don't have to be perfect," her mother once said. "You just have to be honest when you play." Those words echoed in her mind. Maybe it was time to let that honesty speak again. The next few days passed quietly. During breaks, she practiced on the cafe piano when no one was watching. Her fingers remembered the old songs, though some notes felt rusty. Still, the more she played, the more confidence returned. Sometimes the cafe owner listened quietly from behind the counter, pretending to wipe glasses but really just watching her in admiration. Word began to spread around town. People whispered about the girl from the cafe who played like a dream. Some said they'd seen her video online. A customer from that night had filmed her performance and uploaded it. It was already gaining views, with comments filled with praise and disbelief. She didn't even know about the video until the cafe owner showed her. He held up his phone, smiling. "You've gone viral," he said. She stared at the screen, shocked. Thousands of people had watched her play. Strangers were writing messages like, "This moved me to tears, and this girl's soul speaks through her hands." Her heart thudded. She wasn't ready for this kind of attention, but she couldn't deny that somewhere deep down, it felt good to know that her music had touched people. One evening, while she was cleaning up, a middle-aged man walked into the cafe. He looked familiar, well-dressed, calm, with the confident air of someone who belonged in the music world. He approached her gently. "You're the one from the video, aren't you?" he asked. She hesitated. "I suppose so," he smiled. "I'm a music teacher at the academy nearby. I saw your video this morning. You have something rare, something you can't teach. Would you consider performing at the town music event next week? Not as a student, but as a guest performer?" Her mouth went dry. "A guest performer?" He nodded. "You've already made people feel something real. That's all that matters in music." She didn't know what to say. The cafe owner, standing behind her, gave her a small nod of encouragement. "Go on," he whispered. "Say yes." After a long pause, she finally spoke. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it," the teacher smiled. "Good, I'll make sure you're included in the lineup." When he left, she sat down at one of the tables, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe what she'd just agreed to. Part of her was terrified. But another part, the same part that remembered her mother's laughter and the sound of old piano keys, felt alive again. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself on a stage, lights shining down, hundreds of eyes watching. What if she froze? What if she messed up? What if the same laughter from before returned? The next morning she arrived early at the cafe. The owner had already opened up and the piano sat quietly in its corner. She walked over, touched the keys, and began to play. The sound filled the empty space, echoing softly against the walls. Her fingers danced through melodies she hadn't played in years. With each passing day, she practiced more, before shifts, after closing, even during quiet afternoons when there were no customers. The students who used to mock her now often stayed behind to listen. They didn't interrupt. They didn't laugh. They just watched quietly, learning from her without saying a word. Days turned into nights, and soon the music event was only a few days away. Posters were up around town. Her name wasn't on them, but word had already spread. People were whispering that the cafe girl would be performing. The owner noticed her anxiety growing. "You're going to do fine," he told her one evening. "Just play like you always do. Forget the crowd." She smiled nervously. "I wish it were that simple," he chuckled. "It is. You don't play for them. You play for her," he said, nodding gently toward the ceiling. as if her mother could still hear. Her throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. For her. That night, as she closed the cafe, she played the same melody again, the one that had first silenced the laughter. The notes drifted softly into the night air. People walking outside slowed down, listening without knowing where the sound came from. It felt like the town itself was waiting. In that quiet moment, as her hands glided over the keys, she realized something simple but powerful. She wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever happened at that event, she had already won back something she thought she'd lost. The part of herself that believed her music could mean something. The melody faded, but the feeling stayed. The old piano, once just a piece of furniture, now held her story within its strings, and as she turned off the lights and locked the cafe door behind her, she felt ready for whatever came next. The day of the music event arrived faster than she expected. The morning was bright, but her stomach twisted with nerves. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself standing on that stage, surrounded by people who expected her to be perfect. The thought made her hands tremble. At the cafe, the owner noticed how quiet she was. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. He placed a small cup of tea in front of her and said softly, "You've got nothing to prove. Just play like you always do. Let the music do the talking." She nodded slowly. "I'll try." The cafe felt different that morning. Customers came in wishing her luck. Some brought flowers. The same students who had once mocked her now seemed proud, like they had been part of something special. One of them said, "You're going to make the whole town proud tonight." She thanked them with a shy smile, but inside she wasn't sure she believed it. What if she failed? What if the nerves took over? She tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept circling back like shadows. By afternoon, she left work early to prepare. She walked home slowly, feeling the weight of the day pressing on her. The streets were filled with people carrying banners and food stalls for the event. It was one of the biggest nights of the year, an open-air concert where musicians from across the town gathered to perform under the stars. When she reached home, she took out the same dress she had worn on her mother's last birthday. It wasn't new or fancy, but it carried memories. She ran her hands gently over the fabric and took a deep breath. "I'll do this for you," she whispered, as if her mother could still hear her. Evening arrived. The town square glowed with lights and the sound of tuning instruments filled the air. The crowd was already large, buzzing with excitement. Families, students, and neighbors gathered on benches and steps, chatting and laughing. The stage was simple but beautiful, decorated with flowers and strings of fairy lights that shimmered softly in the wind. Backstage, she stood quietly, watching other performers go before her. A young boy played the violin, a choir sang harmonies that echoed through the night, and a band performed lively jazz that made the crowd clap along. Everyone seemed confident, full of energy. She, on the other hand, felt small. The music teacher from the academy found her waiting near the corner. He smiled gently. "Nervous?" She nodded. "A little," he chuckled. "Good, that means you care. Just remember, people don't want perfection, they want to feel something. Give them that and they'll never forget you." His words comforted her. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. When the announcer called her name, her heart jumped. The crowd clapped politely, but most of them didn't know who she was yet. She stepped onto the stage. The lights felt warm on her face. The piano stood at the center, shining softly under the glow. For a moment she froze. So many faces stared back at her. She could hear whispers, some curious, some doubtful. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw the cafe owner sitting near the front row, smiling proudly. That was enough. She sat down at the piano. The crowd grew quiet. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes and took one long breath. The memory of her mother's hands guiding hers returned, and then she began to play. The first notes were gentle, like raindrops falling softly on water. The melody moved slowly, delicate but steady. Her fingers found their rhythm, and soon the music began to grow. Each note carried emotion. Every fear, every memory, every piece of her life woven into sound. The crowd leaned in closer. The noise of the festival faded. Even the wind seemed to slow down, as if listening. Her playing wasn't about showing skill. It was about honesty. There was pain in her music, but also warmth, hope, and something deeply human. She played the song her mother had written years ago. A melody meant for no one else but her. Every note told a story, of laughter once shared, of loss endured, of quiet strength. Halfway through, she felt the crowd disappear. It was just her and the piano. Her eyes stayed closed, her hands moving as if guided by something beyond memory. The melody rose higher, then fell into silence, then rose again, soft and full of meaning. People began to cry quietly. Some held hands. Others closed their eyes. The music touched something they didn't know they carried inside. Even the students from the cafe stood near the edge of the crowd, speechless. They had thought they understood music, but what they heard that night went deeper than technique. It was something real. When the final note echoed into the night, she didn't move right away. Her fingers rested on the keys as if afraid to let go. Then slowly she lifted her hands and opened her eyes. The world was still. And then, applause. It started softly, then grew louder, stronger, until the whole square was clapping. Some people stood up. Others shouted her name. The sound was overwhelming, but all she could do was smile through the tears that filled her eyes. The cafe owner stood with his hands raised high, clapping harder than anyone else. The music teacher beside him looked proud, his eyes glistening. She bowed her head slightly, humbled and thankful. When she stepped off the stage, several people rushed to meet her. Strangers thanked her, saying her music made them remember someone they lost or made them feel peace they hadn't felt in years. One older woman hugged her, whispering, "Your mother would be proud." Those words almost broke her, but in the most beautiful way. Backstage, she sat alone for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Her hands were still shaking, but this time not from fear, from disbelief, from joy, from relief. The teacher came up behind her and said, "Do you realize what you just did?" She looked up, smiling faintly. "I just played." He laughed softly. "No, you gave this town something it didn't know it needed." Later that night, as the event came to an end, people were still talking about her performance. Some had recorded it. Others posted photos. The same whispers that once carried doubt now carried admiration. As she walked home, the streets were quiet again, just like the night she first played at the cafe. She carried her shoes in her hand, the cool ground beneath her feet. The stars above shimmered gently, as if applauding her too. When she reached her apartment, she sat by the window and looked out at the town. Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear faint music from the festival, but it didn't matter. The melody she had played still echoed inside her heart. She thought of her mother again. For years, she had avoided playing because it hurt too much, but now she realized something simple. The pain hadn't left, but it had turned into something beautiful. Her music wasn't about sadness anymore. It was about remembering love. She sat down at her small keyboard and played the same melody again, quietly, softly, just for herself. The night outside was calm. A few lights still flickered from nearby homes, and as she played, she smiled through tears, because she knew her mother's spirit was still with her in every note, every pause, every breath. The town would talk about her performance for days, maybe weeks. But for her, it wasn't about fame or attention. It was about finding herself again. The girl who once hid behind fear, now standing free in the light of her own music. That night, as she closed her eyes to sleep, she whispered, "Thank you, Mom," and the faint sound of piano keys seemed to echo softly in her dreams. The next morning, the town still buzzed with talk about her performance. People stopped by the cafe just to ask about her, some to thank her, others to see the piano where it all began. The cafe owner could hardly keep up with the conversations. Everyone wanted to know more about the quiet girl whose music made the whole town fall silent. When she walked into work, she felt everyone's eyes on her. But this time it wasn't the kind of attention that made her uncomfortable. It was warm, full of kindness. Customers greeted her with smiles, and a few even clapped softly as she passed by. She blushed, whispering thank you and trying to get back to her usual tasks. But deep down she felt something new. Confidence. The students from the academy came in again that afternoon. They didn't joke this time. One of them approached the counter, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "These are for you," he said awkwardly. "You were incredible. I think you reminded all of us what real music means." She smiled gently, taking the flowers. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." They talked for a while. They told her how they'd been practicing for months, trying to perfect every note. but her simple, heartfelt performance had touched people more deeply than any of their polished ones. She told them quietly, "I don't think music is about perfection. It's about feeling something and letting others feel it too." They nodded, all of them understanding now in a way they hadn't before. The cafe owner watched them from behind the counter with pride in his eyes. He'd seen her grow, from the quiet girl who barely spoke to anyone, to someone who had found her voice without saying a single word. That evening, as the cafe began to close, a man in a dark coat entered. He wasn't from around town. He introduced himself politely to the owner and said he'd come all the way from the city after seeing the video of her performance online. "I run a small recording studio," he explained. "I'd like to meet the pianist from the cafe." The owner called her over and she walked up nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. The man smiled warmly. "You have something rare," he said. "You play from your heart. I'd like to offer you a chance to record your music professionally. People deserve to hear what you have to say through your piano." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Me? Record?" she asked softly. "I've never done anything like that." He nodded. "That's all right. I'll guide you through it. You don't need to be famous to move people. You already are doing that." The cafe owner placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You should do it," he said. "This is your time," she hesitated. It all felt unreal. Just days ago, she was cleaning tables, ignored by everyone. Now people were talking about her, wanting to hear her play again. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Finally, she said quietly, "All right. I'll do it," the man smiled. "Good, we'll set a date. I promise, it'll be something special." The next few weeks felt like a dream. She traveled to the city for the first time in years. The recording studio was unlike anything she had ever seen. Walls covered in soft panels, large microphones hanging from the ceiling, and a grand piano in the center of the room that seemed to glow under the soft lights. She sat down slowly, her reflection shining back at her from the polished surface of the piano. Her hands shook at first. The producer watched quietly from behind the glass window. "Take your time," he said gently through the speaker. "There's no rush." She closed her eyes and thought of the cafe, of her mother, of the laughter that once hurt, and the silence that followed when she played. And then she began. The same melody filled the studio, pure and tender. The producer listened, speechless. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then his voice came through the speaker again. "That was perfect. You didn't just play, you told a story." For the next few days, they recorded more pieces. Some her mother had taught her, others she created herself. Each song carried emotion that seemed to reach beyond the room. The producer said it felt like she was painting feelings with sound. When the recordings were done, he promised to release them online. "I think people will love this," he said. "It's honest, and honesty always finds a way to people's hearts." She returned home to the cafe, unsure what would happen next. But within a week, her recordings began to spread everywhere. Comments poured in from people across the world, some saying her music helped them heal, others saying it made them cry in the best way. She read the messages with tears in her eyes, unable to believe it was really happening. The cafe became a kind of local landmark. People traveled from nearby towns just to sit in the corner where she used to play. The piano, once dusty and ignored, now carried a sense of quiet pride. Every key told a piece of her journey. Despite all the attention, she remained humble. She still worked at the cafe, still smiled at every customer, still cleaned the tables like before. She said the cafe was where it all began, and she wanted to stay connected to that simple life that had given her everything. One evening, as she was closing up, she sat by the piano again. The cafe was empty, the lights soft and warm. She touched the keys gently, not to perform this time, but just to feel. The first notes she played were slow, almost like a whisper. It was the same melody she played the first night the laughter turned to silence. As she played, she remembered her mother's words, the cafe owner's encouragement, the faces of the students who had learned to respect her. She realized that music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. The cafe owner came out from the back and stood quietly, listening. When she finished, he said softly, "You know, the first time I saw you touch that piano, I knew something would happen. I just didn't know it would be this big." She smiled, her eyes warm. "I didn't know either. I just needed to play again," he nodded. "You reminded a lot of people what real passion looks like." She looked at the piano. I just played what I felt. Maybe that's all music really is. He chuckled. Maybe you're right. The days passed peacefully after that. The fame didn't change her. She continued to live simply, playing whenever her heart told her to, sometimes for crowds, sometimes for just one person, and sometimes for no one at all. One afternoon, a little girl walked into the cafe with her parents. The girl stopped near the piano, staring at it curiously. She asked shyly, "Can I touch it?" The young woman smiled. "Of course you can." She lifted the girl onto the stool and guided her small hands to the keys. The sound that came out was clumsy but full of joy. The cafe filled with soft laughter. "Do you play?" the little girl asked. The woman nodded. "A little. Can you show me?" She smiled, sat beside her, and began to play slowly. The girl watched with wide eyes, fascinated by how easily the notes flowed. When the song ended, the girl whispered, "I want to play like you someday." The woman smiled, her heart full. "You will. Just keep playing, no matter what people say." That moment reminded her of herself years ago, the same curiosity, the same quiet dream. She realized then that music had come full circle. It had started with her mother, passed through her hands, and was now reaching new ones. That night, as the cafe lights dimmed and the streets outside grew quiet, she played one last song. It wasn't for the crowd, or the internet, or even for her mother this time. It was for life itself, for all the moments that had led her here. The laughter, the pain, the silence, and the music that tied them all together. The last note lingered in the air, gentle and calm. She smiled softly and whispered to herself, "It was never about them believing in me. It was about me believing in myself." And as she walked out of the cafe, locking the door behind her, the night air carried the faint sound of her melody into the distance, a sound that would never truly fade. Years passed, and her name quietly became known far beyond her small town. People who once laughed at her now proudly told others that they knew her when she used to play in a cafe by the corner street. The video of her first performance was still online, watched millions of times with comments filled with emotions and stories from strangers who found comfort in her music. But she never let the fame change her heart. She still wore the same calm smile, still spoke gently, and still believed that music was never about showing off. It was about sharing a part of your soul. The cafe had grown busier than ever. Tourists from faraway places visited, hoping to catch a glimpse of her sitting by the piano. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. She often said, "Music isn't something you can force. It comes when it wants to." And whenever it came, she played like it was her first day again, with the same quiet emotion that had once made everyone in that small cafe stop and listen. One winter afternoon, the cafe was filled with warmth and laughter. The owner had hung small golden lights along the windows and soft snowflakes drifted outside. She sat near the counter, sipping her tea, when a young man approached nervously. He looked barely 20, holding a small notebook filled with handwritten songs. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I'm a musician too. I've been playing for a while, but people don't really take me seriously. They say I'm wasting my time. I just wanted to ask, how did you keep going when no one believed in you?" She looked at him for a moment, seeing herself in his unsure eyes. "I kept playing," she said simply. "Not to prove them wrong, but to remind myself why I started. If you play for others, their opinions will control you. But if you play for yourself, no one can take that away." The young man nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." Before he left, she handed him a small folded paper. "This is one of my old melodies," she said. "It helped me remember who I was when I felt lost. Maybe it'll do the same for you." He left with tears in his eyes, clutching the paper like a treasure. Watching him go, she felt something inside her. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing that your story has helped someone else start theirs. Later that evening, when the cafe was closing, the owner sat across from her, wiping down the tables. "You've changed so many lives," he said. "People come here not just for coffee, but for hope." She smiled softly. "I didn't plan that. I just played what I felt," he chuckled. "Sometimes that's all the world needs, a little honesty." She looked toward the piano. The golden light reflected off its keys, and she thought about all the memories it held. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "I still remember the first time you sat there. You looked so nervous, like the piano might reject you." She laughed quietly. "I was terrified. I thought they'd laugh again. They did, he said with a grin, but not for long. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence. The world outside was calm, and for a moment it felt like time itself had stopped. That night she walked home through the snow. The streets were quiet, the air crisp and cold. She looked up at the dark sky, the stars faintly visible. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of completion. She had found her place, not on a big stage, not in fame, but in connection. Every song she had played had carried a piece of her story, and now those pieces lived in people she had never met. The next morning, she received a letter. It was from the producer who had helped her record years ago. He wrote that her album had reached a milestone, over 100 million streams. But more importantly, he said that a foundation wanted to create a small music program in her name for children who couldn't afford lessons. The letter ended with a simple line: "Your music continues to inspire those who thought they had no voice." She stared at the letter for a long time, her eyes glistening. Then she folded it gently and placed it on the piano. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular. Over the following months, the program became real. She began visiting schools, teaching children how to express themselves through music. Some were shy, some full of energy, but each one carried a spark that reminded her of her own beginnings. She didn't lecture or push them to be perfect. Instead, she told them, just listen to your heart. That's where music starts. One afternoon, a small boy sat at the piano frustrated. "I can't do it," he said. "It doesn't sound good." She knelt beside him and smiled. "Close your eyes," she said. "Now play what you feel, not what you think is right." He did, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The sound wasn't flawless, but it was real. When he opened his eyes, she said softly, "See? That's music." He smiled, and something lit up inside him. That evening, she stayed late after everyone had gone home. The classroom was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. She sat at the piano one last time, letting her fingers wander across the keys. The melody that came out was new, gentle, full of gratitude. It wasn't planned, it just came to her like a memory finding its way home. The next day, she returned to the cafe. The owner greeted her with a warm grin. "Back where it all started," he said. "Always," she replied with a smile. He poured her a cup of tea and leaned against the counter. "You've done something special. Your music reached the world, but it never left this place." She nodded. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. That afternoon, a small group of people gathered around as she began to play. The same familiar melody filled the cafe, though now it carried years of love, struggle, and growth. Some of the old regulars closed their eyes, smiling. Others filmed quietly, wanting to hold on to the moment. But for her, it wasn't about being seen. It was about feeling alive in the music again. As the song ended, there was silence, followed by soft applause. She looked around and realized something profound. The cafe was full of people who had once been strangers, now connected by a single thread: her piano. After the crowd left, she stayed alone for a while. The piano sat quietly under the fading light, its wood glowing softly. She placed her hand on it and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Then she smiled, stood up, and looked out the window. The world outside had changed so much, but she had learned that some things never should. The truth of her music, the honesty, the feeling, the love, was timeless. That night, she walked by the river near her home. The moonlight danced on the water, and the air was cool against her skin. She thought of her mother, the cafe owner, the laughter, the silence, and all the songs in between. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had anything left to prove. She had lived her story fully. Years later, the cafe still stood, though now others played at the piano too. The young man she once encouraged became a teacher there, guiding new students with the same kindness she had shown him. A small framed picture hung on the wall beside the piano, her sitting there smiling softly, hands resting on the keys. Underneath it was a small plaque that read, "She made the world listen." People who visited often asked about her, and the owner would smile and say, "She didn't just play the piano. She made us all feel something real." And sometimes when the cafe was quiet late at night, the sound of soft piano notes could still be heard. Faint, distant, like a memory refusing to fade. Some said it was the wind through the windows, others said it was her spirit still playing. But those who had heard her once before knew better. They smiled and whispered, "She's still here." Because true music, the kind that comes from the heart, never really ends. It lingers in memories, in stories, in the people it touches,